study looked at life change and stress through the method of creating a social readjustment rating scale. The study was conducted by Thomas H. Holmes and Richard H. Ray. This is Kristen, that's Taylor, this is Misael, and my name's Alyssa. Our research question asked, how can a standardized scale be created to measure life stress? Many times people explain that they have large amounts of stress or very little amounts of stress. What Holmes and Ray researched was whether there was an actual rating scale that could be developed to create levels of stress that people endure. The question of how is life stress measured is extremely important if we ever want to be able to accurately measure each person's stress levels based on a standardized scale. This question is also important because if we can create a standardized scale, then we will be able to determine the relationship between stress and illness, and whether or not they affect each other. This study relates to class in a couple of different ways. First, our discussion on correlation studies versus experimental studies early in the semester can be related to this study because this is a correlational study and can't be an experiment for reasons you will later see. Therefore, we will not accurately have a cause and effect relationship. Another way this study relates back to class is through the development of correlation pathways that we discussed last week. For example, direct stress could influence illness. The reverse side of it, illness could influence stress. There could be a lurking variable of exposure to germs which could influence stress and illness. Or it could even be the feedback loop, where it could be a vicious loop of stress influencing illness and illness influencing stress. Holmes and Ray thought of 43 different stressors and predicted that a random sample of people could relate to them and be able to rate them with a certain score. They predicted that from that random sample, a standardized scale could be developed, and that could help in determining the relationship between stress and illness. Holmes and Ray later predicted that stress would cause the onset of illnesses.
The study was a correlational design, and they used the questionnaire to gather the data that the participants had filled out. They chose a correlational design because it was unethical for the researchers to subject the participants to such things as having their spouse die or having them forced marriage. And, the participants the participants were in the study were used as, or the participants were humans in the study because they wanted to find out about human stressors. The participants were age ranged from 30 to 60 years old, and there was a random sample of 394 participants that were chosen randomly, and this whole study was conducted in America. The the 394 participants filled out a questionnaire made up of 43 positive and negative events that would cause stress and make one have to readjust their lives, such as death of a friend or pregnancy. These events were empirically derived from the clinical experiences. Participants were then instructed to rate the events based on the degree of necessary readjustment. They were told to use personal experience and common knowledge. The way they had them rate the events is they gave the life event of marriage the median value of 500, and the participants had to compare the degree of readjustment of the other live events with the value of marriage. So if the participants would have to participants would have to ask themselves if the event needed more or less readjustment than marriage. And the dependent variable in the study were the ratings that the participants gave the events, and the independent variables were the age, gender, ethnicity, and other things such as that the participants were.
So from this questionnaire, researchers found that all the events that the participants rated they found them all similarly stressful. There was a strong positive correlation between the ratings of each group within the subgroups of the sample of participants. So this means that within each subgroup that Ms. Lyle talked about, such as religion, age, gender, within each of those subgroups, they rated, there was a strong positive correlation between the ratings that they gave. And so thus the researchers were able to create the social readjustment rating scale. So this is the scale, and it's really small, you probably can't see it, so I'll explain it. They put the events in order of the values, the mean values that were given by the participants. And they found the mean value by taking the mean score of each event and dividing it by 10. So as Messiah said, they started with marriage at 500, and so dividing that by 10, the value is 50. So the first, the top ranked life event, or the most stressful, the one that causes the most social readjustment, is death of a spouse with a mean value of 100. Then it goes down to divorce at 73, marital separation 65, and it keeps on going. And then the least stressful, the one that causes the least amount of social readjustment, was minor violations of the law at 11. And then this is a table that shows the correlations between the ratings. And the researchers did this to check for consistency. They divided the sample into each of these subgroups. And so as you can see at the top here, the first group was male versus female, and the correlation is 0.965, which is a very strong positive correlation. So that means that both male and females gave very similar ratings to each event. And as you can see, all of these groups, single, married, age, ethnicity, religion, they're all very strongly correlated. They're all 0.9 something, with the exception of white versus Negro at 0.82, but that's still a very strong correlation. So the researchers' predictions were supported because they were able to create this scale based on similar rankings. The ratings that the participants gave the events correlated strongly within each subgroup, which shows that there was a strong degree of agreement between the magnitude of each event, and so they were able to create that scale. In later research, once they had created this standardized scale to measure stress levels, Holmes and Ray went on to determine the relationship between the SRRS, the Social Readjustment Rating Scale, or the levels of stress, and the probability of illness. So in 1974, Holmes and Masuda conducted a study in which several thousand participants used the Social Readjustment Rating Scale to calculate their stress levels. And they did this by adding up the life change units, LCUs, and basically that's just the mean value that was given to each event. So like death of a spouse was the top with 100, so that would be the LCU. And so participants added up their score and then reported their history of illness. And using that, the researchers made a graph to illustrate the findings. So if you go to the next slide, this is the graph. And what it's showing is that people whose score was between 150 and 199, 37% of those people showed major health changes. And then over here, those with the score between 300 and above, 79% of those people with that kind of score had a major health change. So this shows that people with higher scores are more at risk for illness. And Alyssa took this little test. She added up her scores to see where she ranked on here. And what was your score, Alyssa?
298.
298. So that puts Alyssa right in here. She was almost 300. So she has like between a 51 and 79% chance of getting an illness. So take care of yourself, Alyssa. And actually go back one. Oh. Yep, keep going. Okay, and then a second study, Ray, Mahan, and Arthur in 1970 conducted a study in which they recorded the LCU scores of 2,500 Navy personnel before they went on a tour of duty. And over that 6-month tour, Those with a score of less than 100 LCUs averaged 1.4 illnesses. Those with a score between 300 and 400 averaged 1.9 illnesses. And those with a score between 500 and 600 averaged 2.1 illnesses. So these studies support the hypothesis that stress and illness are related and that the social readjustment rating scale can predict illness.
Okay, landmark study. Holmes and Ray's study is a landmark study because researchers now have a universal scale that they can use to measure life stress. Researchers can now use their social readjustment rating scale score to predict the likelihood of illnesses. Now we know that there is an association between stress and illness and that psychosomatic illnesses are real. Inclusion of positive and negative life events as well as both in and out of your control. So in the study they used events such as like death of a spouse and marriage, and some of these are in your control and some are not. And there's positive and negative ones, so like obviously marriage can be positive, but it's like stressful because you're trying to like plan a marriage and like your wedding. And death of a spouse is obviously negative. Does not take a differing interpretations of stressful events, and there are many other factors that take into account of illnesses. As social readjustment rating scale scores take into account for only 10% of variation of ill people. Wait, was there one more? I was kidding. Okay. Recommendations. If you have a high social readjustment rating scale score, take care of your body because you are more at risk for contracting an illness. Second, find a way that works for you to relieve your stress. This can include anything from exercising, listening to music, taking a nap, or sometimes even cleaning.